While my mother-in-law was cheerfully shopping with my husband's mistress, I was canceling all her cards. My mother-in-law still doesn't know a thing, that this palace she lives in is my property. My revenge has only just begun. All right, mark your attendance first with a subscription, a like, and a comment. If you've done that, let's get into the beginning of the story. The tinkling of a silver spoon against a porcelain plate was the only music that filled the grand dining room, a huge crystal chandelier above the table reflecting its golden light on the cold, brilliant surface of Italian marble. This was the stage where the drama of their family was performed every night. Eleanor Vance, the unacknowledged director and lead actress, listlessly stirred her cream of vegetable soup. That night, she had prepared her husband's favorite dish, Ethan Cole's favorite, slow-braised beef short ribs, a process that took over 5 hours, but Eleanor did it gladly, hoping to see a smile of satisfaction on his face. However, Ethan ate in silence. His eyes landed more often on the screen of his phone than on his wife sitting across from him. "This stew is quite good, Eleanor." Helen's voice broke the silence. Her tone was dry but filled with invisible barbs. "It reminds me of the taste of a lentil soup from some greasy spoon diner near our old house. For being made by someone like you, it tastes quite authentic." A compliment wrapped in an insult. Eleanor was used to it. She simply sketched a slight curve with her lips, a pale smile she had practiced for years. "I'm glad it's to your liking, Mom." "Of course Mom likes it." "Mom appreciates anything her daughter-in-law does," Ethan said, finally looking up from his phone. He winked at Eleanor as if they were a complicit team, but Eleanor knew that defense was hollow. It was simply Ethan's way of ending potentially uncomfortable conversations, not to protect her pride. "But next time, try a recipe from the French cookbook I bought you. Our family needs to get used to classy dishes, not this market food," Helen continued, deliberately setting down her spoon with an elegant gesture. Eleanor didn't respond. She just looked at her husband, searching for a modicum of support in his eyes, but all she found was his evasive gaze as he busily poured water into his glass. In that very instant, Eleanor felt like the loneliest person in the palace she herself had built. This house, filled with tall columns and imported furniture, felt colder and emptier than the modest rented room she had grown up in. After dinner, as always, it was Eleanor's job to clean everything up. The housekeepers were only allowed to work until the afternoon. A rule from Helen, supposedly to protect the family's privacy at night. In reality, it was another way to underline Eleanor's position as the home's personal servant. As she washed the expensive dishes she would never have dared to use in her own upbringing, Eleanor saw her reflection in the dark kitchen window. It was the tired face of a woman who had everything but owned nothing. In the outside world, unknown to her husband and mother-in-law, she was a queen. Eleanor was the founder and CEO of Apex Dynamics, a tech startup currently valued in the billions of dollars. She built the company from the ground up with her own sweat and tears, but in this house she deliberately hid her brilliance. She let Ethan appear as the successful head of the family, living off investments from his father's inheritance, a lie they had created together so as not to hurt Ethan's ego. All this opulence, the house, the cars, the vacations, even Helen's unlimited credit card, came from Eleanor's account. They lived comfortably on the fruits of her hard work while constantly trampling on her pride. That night, as she rinsed the suds from her hands, Eleanor wondered for the first time, "How long must I continue this charade?" Eleanor's doubt didn't arrive like a storm. It was like a slow drizzle that soaked her clothes and chilled her bones. It all began with a routine in her office, a minimalist space equipped with cutting-edge technology that contrasted with the rest of the house, considered by Ethan and Helen to be Eleanor's strange hobby corner. There, behind the thick, solid wood door, Eleanor shed her role as a submissive wife. She was E.V. Sar, a respected initial in the business world. In front of monitors displaying complex data and charts, she simultaneously monitored the pulse of her company and her personal finances. It was then that she noticed an anomaly. The credit card she had given Helen, normally used only for monthly shopping at high-end grocery stores or occasional meetings in a hotel coffee shop, showed a strange spending pattern. There was a bill from the luxury boutique Maison Elise for a sum equivalent to the price of a car. There were also multiple transactions at the Pearl Beauty Institute, an elite beauty salon where one treatment cost a manager's salary, and what appeared most frequently were dinner bills from the Celestial View, a fine dining restaurant atop a skyscraper that Eleanor herself had never visited. At first, Eleanor ignored it. She thought maybe Helen wanted to treat herself, but the transactions repeated almost weekly, and always on the same days that Ethan claimed to have to work late on a new project or meet an important client from out of town. The suspicion grew thicker. Ethan became more distant. His phone was always on silent, and he never parted with it. He often walked away to take calls in a low voice. Sometimes, when he came home late at night, Eleanor would catch the scent of an unfamiliar woman's perfume on his shirt. It wasn't the strong, classic fragrance of her mother-in-law, but a sweet, modern scent. When Eleanor tried to ask, Ethan always had a slick answer. "Ah, that must be a client's perfume, honey. The meeting room was very small." Or, "Oh, I don't like to talk about work at home. It gives me a headache." The climax came with a call from Sarah, her best friend since college. Sarah's voice sounded hesitant on the other end of the line. "Eleanor, are you okay?" "Of course, Sarah. Why do you ask?" Eleanor replied, forcing herself to sound cheerful. There was a pause. Eleanor could hear Sarah take a deep breath. "I don't want to pry, but I happened to see Ethan at the department store a few days ago. He wasn't alone." Eleanor's heart beat a little faster. "He was probably with a client," she said, more to convince herself. "It didn't look like a client, Eleanor. And I think I saw Helen at the same restaurant too, at the same table, laughing with them. But I was far away. I'm not sure." The call ended in an awkward atmosphere. Eleanor said, "Thanks," but her mind was a whirlwind. Helen, laughing with Ethan and an unknown woman. The puzzle pieces began to fit together, forming a terrible picture she didn't even dare to imagine. The drizzle of doubt now felt like a heavy storm cloud over her head, ready to unleash a tempest at any moment. 2 days later, the storm arrived via a short message on her phone. That afternoon, Eleanor was in a video conference with her Singapore team. She was eloquently and confidently discussing the expansion strategy into the Southeast Asian market. On screen, she was a brilliant CEO, but when the call ended and silence once again flooded her office, she became the restless Eleanor again. Her phone vibrated on the desk, showing a message notification from Sarah. Her heart skipped a beat. With slightly trembling hands, she opened the message. It was a short sentence. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I think you need to see this." Below the sentence was a photo. Eleanor's world seemed to stop. The breath caught in her throat. The photo, apparently taken secretly from a table across the way, showed a scene in a luxury boutique's cafe. There, sitting very intimately, were 3 people she knew. Her husband, Ethan, was looking adoringly at a young woman beside him. It was, without a doubt, the mistress. She was leaning coquettishly on Ethan's shoulder, showing him a new shopping bag from a famous brand. But that wasn't what shattered Eleanor. What broke her heart to pieces was the third person in the photo. Helen, her mother-in-law, was sitting across from them with a smile so radiant and sincere that she had never once given to Eleanor. And her hand, Helen's hand, was tenderly reaching out to brush a stray strand of hair from the mistress's cheek, a maternal gesture, a sign of acceptance, a seal of blessing. Eleanor felt a cold that seeped into her bones, colder than the marble floor of her house. Ethan's betrayal was painful enough, but to see her mother-in-law, whom she had served despite always being dismissed, conspiring with her husband's mistress, and even pampering her in that way, was like being stabbed from the front and back at the same time. She enlarged the photo with numb eyes, examining every detail. The shopping bag the mistress was holding was from the Maison Elise boutique. Their table was filled with the pretty desserts from the Imperial Patisserie. Every strange charge on the credit card now had a face, the satisfied face of the mistress and the happy face of Helen. They were feasting on her money, celebrating their betrayal behind her back. Crash. The glass of water next to her laptop fell to the floor, shattering like her heart. But Eleanor didn't cry. The tears seemed to have frozen in her eyelids. There was only a hollow void, and that void slowly began to fill with a cold, burning anger. She looked at her pale face reflected in the dark screen of her phone. The woman in the reflection looked fragile and defeated, but in her eyes, something had just been born. Something hard, sharp, and relentless. This farce had reached its final act. Eleanor remained motionless in her chair for nearly an hour. She sat in silence amid the shards of broken glass, letting the stillness of the office absorb all the emotions boiling inside her. The pain, the shock, and the disappointment slowly settled, replaced by a terrifying calm. It was the calm before the tsunami. She stood up and stepped over the broken glass without flinching. Her steps led her to the large window overlooking the perfectly manicured backyard. A garden she had designed and paid to maintain, but had never been able to enjoy in peace. Until now, she had thought her patience was a virtue. She thought that if she submitted and dedicated herself, one day she would be accepted. She thought that if she hid her power, she could maintain peace at home and her husband's ego. How naive she had been. Her patience was taken for weakness. Her dedication was considered a duty. Her sacrifice was taken for granted. They, Ethan and Helen, had taken everything from her. Her time, her energy, her money, and now her dignity. They let her build this palace only to turn her into a servant within it. Meanwhile, they brought in a stranger and sat her on the throne. "It's over," she whispered to her reflection in the window. Her voice was hoarse but firm. She returned to her desk. With a decisive move, she turned the monitors back on, the stock charts, the financial reports, the urgent emails from directors. Everything looked different. Now, this was no longer just a job. It was her kingdom, her source of power, what she had built with blood and sweat, something she would not allow the parasites in her life to trample on. The patient woman who cooked beef short ribs for 5 hours had died that afternoon. What remained was Eleanor Vance, the CEO of Apex Dynamics, a strategist known for being cold and calculating. The long slumber as a submissive wife was over. The queen had awakened. She picked up the phone and dialed the number of her personal assistant. "Ms. Davies, good afternoon." "Yes, Ms. Vance, how can I help you?" Davies's professional voice sounded through the earpiece. "I need several things. First, prepare a complete report of all my personal assets, including real estate, vehicles, and bank accounts. Separate what are marital assets from what are assets purely in my name acquired before the marriage." "Understood, Ms. Vance." Second, contact our legal team. Tell them to prepare a draft of a divorce petition and division of assets. Attach all the assets I requested in the first point as initial data. There was a brief pause. Ms. Davies was clearly surprised. "Yes, Ms. Vance, I'll process it immediately." "And Davies?" Eleanor added, her voice as cold as ice. "From now on, inform me in real time of all expenses generated on the supplementary credit cards in the names of Ethan Cole and Helen Cole." "Understood, Ms. Vance." After hanging up, Eleanor opened a desk drawer. She took out a small leather-bound notebook. On the first page, she wrote in neat, determined handwriting, "Operation Reclaim Everything." A plan began to form in her mind. Not a plan of emotional revenge, but a calculated business strategy. The objective was to strip them of all the power and luxury that had made them so arrogant and force them to face reality. She would make them feel what it was like to have nothing. The first execution of her plan began the next morning. Eleanor deliberately woke up earlier, put on her best pantsuit, and left the house before Ethan and Helen woke up. She had breakfast in her CEO office on the 50th floor overlooking the entire city of New York. The view reminded her how vast her world was, and how small her domestic problems were from that height. At exactly 9 a.m., she called her private banker. "Mr. Roberts, good morning. This is Eleanor Vance." "Ah, Ms. Vance, it's an honor to receive your call. How can I assist you?" "I need you to freeze all supplementary credit and debit cards linked to my accounts with immediate effect." "All cards, including those in the names of Mr. Ethan Cole and Mrs. Helen Cole?" Mr. Roberts asked for confirmation. "Yes, all of them. As for the reason, simply note security concerns. Say we've detected suspicious activity." Eleanor said in a business tone that brooked no argument. "Understood, Ms. Vance. Request received. I will process it immediately. In 5 minutes, all cards will be inoperative." Eleanor hung up, feeling a cold satisfaction. The first blow had been struck. Across town, Helen and her son's mistress, Chloe, were enjoying the height of their arrogance. After a treatment at a beauty salon, they decided to have lunch at a 5-star hotel restaurant. Chloe coquettishly pointed to the lobster thermidor and the most expensive champagne. Helen, feeling very generous and powerful with a wallet that wasn't hers, simply smiled and nodded. You deserve the best, dear. Our future daughter-in-law has to look perfect, Helen said with a wink. When they had finished dessert and the bill arrived, Helen smugly handed her black card to the waiter. A few minutes later, the waiter returned with a troubled face. I'm sorry, ma'am. The card has been declined. Helen's face turned red. What do you mean declined? Try it again. The signal must be bad, she snapped. The waiter tried again. The result was the same. It's still not working, ma'am. Chloe was starting to get impatient. Helen clicked her tongue and pulled another card from her purse, the platinum one. Declined too. Panic began to set in. She tried the debit card. The same. Murmurs from nearby tables began to be heard. Helen's face was burning. Shame, anger, and confusion mingled into one. She immediately pulled out her phone and dialed Eleanor's number. In her office, Eleanor saw her mother-in-law's name flashing on her phone screen. She let it ring a couple of times before answering with a slightly sleepy voice. Hello, Mom. Eleanor, what have you done to my cards? Why are they all being declined? Helen's shrill voice came through, so loud she didn't need to put it on speaker. Eleanor held the phone away from her ear for a moment. Oh, they're declined. Mom? She asked, feigning surprise. Maybe it's a bank network error, or perhaps you entered the PIN incorrectly. Try again later. Don't lie to me. This is your doing, I'm sure of it. Reactivate them right now. I'm sorry. I'm in the middle of a meeting. I can't be disturbed, Eleanor replied calmly, and without waiting for a response, she hung up. She looked at her phone screen, then turned it off. On the other end, she could imagine her mother-in-law's panic and fury. She could imagine Chloe's sullen face, whose plans for a luxurious day had been ruined. A small, cold smile, the first genuine smile in a long time, appeared on Eleanor's lips. The game had just begun, and this time she held all the cards. The front door of the imposing house burst open, shattering the evening's silence. Helen stormed in like a whirlwind, her face congested with anger and humiliation. Behind her trailed a disgruntled Chloe. The humiliation at the restaurant had been unforgettable. After all the cards were declined, Chloe had to pay with her own debit card, an unexpected expense she complained about during the entire taxi ride. Eleanor was waiting for them in the living room. She was sitting calmly on a single sofa with a cup of hot jasmine tea in her hand, as if expecting honored guests. The sight infuriated Helen even more. Eleanor Vance! She screamed, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. How dare you humiliate me in public? Who do you think you are, huh? Eleanor took a slow sip of her tea before setting it on the table. She looked at her mother-in-law with cold, unfamiliar eyes that Helen had never seen before. I am just sitting in my house, Mom. You're the one who came in screaming at this time of night. Who's the rude one here? Helen was left speechless. The calm, sharp reply rendered her wordless for a moment. Until now, Eleanor would have been the daughter-in-law who bowed her head and apologized for any fault. But the woman before her was different. Chloe, sensing the unfavorable atmosphere, decided to intervene with a sycophantic tone. Ma'am, calm down. I'm sure Eleanor didn't do it on purpose, right, Eleanor? Next time, don't forget to pay the credit card bills, okay? The lady gets embarrassed. It was a fatal mistake. Eleanor's eyes locked onto Chloe. Her gaze was as sharp as a scalpel. First, I have never forgotten to pay any bill. Second, I don't recall inviting you into my home. And third, Eleanor paused, letting each word sink in. This is a matter between my mother-in-law and me. A stranger has no business interfering. Chloe's face instantly paled. The future daughter-in-law status that Helen boasted so much about seemed to vanish without a trace under Eleanor's gaze. She looked around for Ethan, who had just come downstairs upon hearing the commotion, searching for defense. Helen finally found her voice again. A stranger? She is Ethan's future wife and my future daughter-in-law. The one who will soon be a stranger here is you. You're nothing but a useless daughter-in-law who can't even manage the house's finances. Eleanor gave a faint smile, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The house finances, Mom. Do you really want to talk about that? As far as I know, the people who have never contributed a single cent to this house's finances are the ones who demand and shout the loudest. The barb was aimed precisely at Helen and Ethan simultaneously. Ethan, who had remained silent until now, finally felt he should come to the defense of his mother and his mistress. But before he could open his mouth, Eleanor had already stood up. "I'm tired. I'm going to rest," she said with a tone of finality. She walked past the three people, still paralyzed by shock, and went up the stairs to her room. She never looked back once. That night, for the first time, Helen felt that something was wrong, very wrong. She was used to living like a queen in this house, where her every word was a command. But tonight, she felt stripped of her power by the daughter-in-law she had always considered a doormat. The storm she had unleashed was nothing but a breeze compared to the cold calm of the awakened Eleanor. After Eleanor disappeared into her room, Helen unleashed her remaining anger on Ethan. "Did you see the wife you chose? She dares to talk back to me. As her husband, you should discipline her. Go talk to her right now and tell her to reactivate all my cards," she whined, tugging at her son's arm. Ethan, his ego wounded by Eleanor's icy attitude, felt challenged. He was the man of the house, or at least he had always believed so. With an arrogant stride, he followed Eleanor to their bedroom. He found her standing in front of the closet, choosing a silk pajama set as if nothing had happened. The sight provoked him. "Eleanor, what's with the attitude?" he asked loudly. "Why are you disrespecting my mother, and why did you block the cards?" Eleanor turned and looked at her husband with an impassive expression. "I'm simply tired of being insulted in my own home, Ethan, and the cards were just a routine security measure." "Security? What nonsense. You humiliated my mother on purpose in front of Chloe. You're jealous, aren't you?" Ethan accused, trying to find a reason his shallow understanding could accept. Eleanor let out a small laugh, a dry, humorless sound that unsettled Ethan. "Jealous, Ethan? I assure you my current emotions are far beyond something so simple." "I don't want to hear it," Ethan snapped, reverting to his arrogant mode. "Go downstairs right now. Apologize to my mother and reactivate all the cards tomorrow morning. I am your husband, and this is an order." It was this exact moment that Eleanor had been waiting for. She put down the pajamas and approached Ethan, looking him directly in the eyes. There was no longer any sweetness or pleading, only the gaze of a CEO evaluating an incompetent subordinate. "Ethan Cole," she called him by his full name, her voice low and dangerous. "Do you really want to talk to me about financial matters? Do you really want to argue about orders and authority in this house?" Ethan fell silent. There was a clear threat in that question, a level of power he had never heard in Eleanor before. Until now, he had no idea where her money came from. He only knew it was always there, flowing into his account every month. Enough money for a lavish lifestyle and to support a mistress. He had always assumed it came from investments Eleanor managed. "Of course I do," he replied, trying to cling to the remnants of his pride, though his voice trembled slightly. Eleanor smirked. "Fine. Then explain to me what your source of income was this month. How much did you contribute to paying the mortgage, the electricity bills, the staff salaries, or even the food you just had for dinner? Before you give someone an order, make sure you have the right to do so." Ethan's tongue was frozen. He couldn't answer. He had never truly worked a day in his life. Everything he had was given to him. And at that moment, under his wife's piercing gaze, he felt like a foolish prince who had just been stripped of his crown. "It's late. I need to sleep," Eleanor said, turning away and ending the conversation. Ethan could only stand there, stunned. His anger was mixed with confusion and a sense of humiliation. He had come to teach his wife a lesson, but instead, he felt he had just received one himself. He didn't fully understand what was happening yet, but one thing was certain. The Eleanor he knew was gone, and he did not like her replacement at all. If the credit card incident was the main shock, the following days were a series of aftershocks that slowly brought down the edifice of their comfort. Eleanor no longer needed to say anything. She just acted in silence. The next morning, Helen, impeccably dressed, was preparing to go to her social gathering. She waited impatiently at the entrance. Her personal driver, Mr. Miller, didn't arrive. After several unanswered calls, she finally called the car service company. The response was brief and professional. "We're sorry, ma'am. The service contract for your address is under review at the request of our primary client. The service is suspended until further notice." Primary client? Helen frowned, not understanding. Reluctantly and grumbling, she called a taxi, a deeply humiliating experience for her. Meanwhile, Ethan was trying to transfer money to Chloe, who wouldn't stop complaining and demanding compensation for the restaurant incident. The notification on his phone screen left him cold. Insufficient funds. He checked his account. Eleanor's monthly transfer, which should have arrived on the 1st, was nowhere to be found. His account was practically empty. Panic seized him. He called Eleanor, but the call went straight to voicemail. The chaos in the house intensified. The head housekeeper approached Helen with a worried face. "Ma'am, our salaries haven't been deposited yet. They're usually in by now, and the pantry inventory is almost gone. The online grocery delivery service has also been suspended for non-payment." Helen, who had never bothered with such trivial details, could only snap, "Well, use the cash in the house." "There is no cash left, ma'am," the housekeeper replied. Helen was speechless. The house, always cool, now felt muggy. The premium cable TV with hundreds of international channels suddenly stopped working. The Wi-Fi speed, once ultra-fast, was now as slow as an old dial-up connection. The comforts they had taken for granted as a right were being cut off one by one without warning. Eleanor was like a ghost in her own house. She left for work before dawn and returned late at night when everyone was asleep. She deliberately avoided confrontation. She let them stew in their own panic, feeling the tap of money, which had always flowed freely, now drip until it ran dry. Their luxury was just an illusion that could be turned off as easily as flipping a switch. And now, that switch was in her hand. In her rented apartment, Chloe was getting restless. Her handsome, rich prince, Ethan, now visited her more often with a frown than with shopping bags. The promises of dinners at the newest restaurants, a trip to Bali, a limited edition watch, it had all evaporated. "Honey, what's wrong with you lately?" Chloe asked, massaging his temples. They had just had dinner, not at a fancy restaurant, but takeout that Ethan had picked up on his way. "There are some problems at home." "What kind of problems?" "Nothing major, just Eleanor being a little strange," Ethan said, trying to avoid the topic. "How strange? Strange enough that my monthly allowance still hasn't arrived?" Chloe snapped, her tone beginning to sharpen. "And where's your car? Why have you been taking taxis everywhere lately? What will my friends think if I tell them I'm dating a man without a car?" Ethan sighed deeply. "The car's in the shop, and there's been an issue with the cards. That's why I couldn't make the transfer. Just be a little patient." "Patience? I've had enough patience, Ethan. I turned down many other rich men for you. You promised you'd marry me and give me a better life than that bland wife of yours. And now what is this? Yesterday I even had to pay the restaurant bill myself," Chloe exploded, her sweet facade crumbling. Her relationship, built on a foundation of luxury and lies, was beginning to show its first cracks. Chloe wasn't with Ethan for love, but for the lifestyle he could provide. When that lifestyle was threatened, her loyalty wavered too. "Listen, this is temporary. Everything will be back to normal soon." Chloe pushed him away. "I don't want promises, I want proof. Next week is my birthday. Buy me that bag we saw at Maison Elise. If you buy it for me, I'll believe everything is fine." Chloe didn't say it, but her threat hung clearly in the air. Ethan sank helplessly onto the sofa. That bag cost tens of thousands of dollars. Even under normal circumstances, it was money he would have to specifically ask Eleanor for. Now, with cobwebs in his account, Chloe's demand felt like a death sentence. He was trapped. On one side was his wife, who had turned into a cold monster controlling his life. On the other, his mistress, who was starting to show her claws as soon as the money ran out. The foolish prince realized his perfect world was crumbling. A week of deprivation was enough to push Helen and Ethan to their mental limit. They couldn't take it anymore. That night, they deliberately waited for Eleanor to return and intercepted her directly in the living room. The lights were on brightly, creating an atmosphere of interrogation. "We need to talk, Eleanor," Ethan said, trying to sound authoritative, though his face showed fatigue and frustration. Eleanor put down her briefcase and looked at them both calmly. "Talk. What exactly do you want?" Helen blurted out, unable to contain herself any longer. "You're torturing us slowly, cutting off all our comforts, humiliating us, making us live like beggars. After all the kindness we've shown you, this is how you repay us? Kindness. Eleanor almost laughed. What kindness are you talking about? The daily insults or blessing your son's affair? Eleanor, this is too much, Ethan continued. You are my wife. Your duty is to serve your husband and your family, not to act on your own like this. If you can't be a good wife, then maybe we what, Ethan? Eleanor cut in, her voice sharp. We get a divorce. Is that what you want? The direct question left Ethan and Helen in shock. They only meant to threaten her. They weren't actually prepared for such a drastic consequence. They knew that without Eleanor, they were nothing. Ethan, she has no respect left. She's trying to destroy your home, Helen cried, trying to manipulate the situation. You are ungrateful, Eleanor. We welcomed you into this prestigious family. You, who come from an ordinary family, we gave you a life of luxury, and you've become a troublemaker. Enough. Eleanor was tired of their false narratives. She said nothing. With a very calm movement, she opened her briefcase, took out a brown envelope, and placed it on the coffee table between them. What is this? Ethan asked suspiciously. Open it, Eleanor replied. With trembling hands, Ethan opened the envelope and pulled out its contents. A glossy, letter-sized photograph. Helen leaned over to see as well. In an instant, all the anger and arrogance vanished from their faces, replaced by a ghastly pallor. The photo clearly showed the scene in the boutique cafe. Ethan looking lovingly at Chloe. Chloe leaning coquettishly, and Helen, smiling happily as she tenderly fixed Chloe's hair, the irrefutable proof of a triple betrayal. A suffocating silence filled the room. The ticking of the wall clock sounded like a hammer. Eleanor finally spoke. Her voice was low but trembled, not from tears, but from long-suppressed anger. Kindness? For what exactly, Mom? Her eyes locked directly onto Helen. For the kindness of blessing my husband's affair with my money, or for the life of luxury you enjoyed with my husband's concubine, while I worked myself to the bone to pay for it all. Then she turned to Ethan. And you, Ethan, you spoke of a wife's duty. Is it a husband's duty to betray, lie, and live like a parasite off his wife? There was no answer. They were both frozen, naked before the truth, caught in the act. The photograph on the table became a silent judge, delivering their sentence. The real storm had just begun, and they realized they had nowhere left to hide. The silence that followed Eleanor's words felt heavier than any storm. The photograph on the table became the room's center of gravity, drawing all eyes and sucking out all the oxygen. Ethan looked at the photo, then at Eleanor, and back at the photo. His face was a canvas of confusion and blatant guilt. He had no excuse. But Helen, who had lived for decades behind a mask of arrogance, would not give up so easily. To her, admitting a mistake was the greatest form of weakness. Her pale face began to turn red again, not with shame, but with an anger that was looking for an outlet. It's a fake, she hissed, pointing at the photo with a trembling finger. It's a doctored photo, I'm sure of it. You're doing this on purpose to get rid of us and keep all of my son's fortune for yourself. Eleanor looked at her without blinking. Your son's fortune, Mom? What fortune are you talking about? All of this. Helen gestured with her hand, encompassing the magnificent room. Everything in this house belongs to Ethan. You are just living here on loan. You should be grateful we let you live here, and now you dare to stage this cheap drama. That threat was her last and fatal mistake. It was the final weapon she had always used to intimidate Eleanor. But that night, the weapon turned against her. All right, Eleanor said calmly, as if dealing with a difficult client. If you insist that I am just living here on loan and that this house is your son's property, then there's nothing more to talk about. Helen felt she had won. I'm glad you know your place. Now pack your bags and get out of my son's house. Out. Ethan looked shocked by the escalation of the situation. Mom? He tried to intervene, but his mother's withering glare silenced him. Eleanor didn't move an inch. She just looked at her mother-in-law with an unreadable expression, a mix of pity and disgust. I will gladly leave, she said. Helen smiled triumphantly. But the ones who will have to pack their bags will be the two of you. She bent down, opened the briefcase she had left on the floor, and took out a thick blue plastic folder. She opened it and spread its contents on the table, right next to the photo of the betrayal. There, laid out, were several official documents with the letterhead of the property registry, stamps, and signatures. The most prominent one was on top, the deed of ownership for the land and the building they were standing in at that very moment. "Read it," Eleanor said. "Read the name of the sole owner listed there." Hesitantly, Ethan picked up the document. His eyes widened as he read the name printed in bold in the owner section. It was not his name, nor his father's, nor a joint title. There was only one name, Eleanor Vance. Below it was the date of the transaction, 2 years before she and Ethan were married. The house had been bought in cash. The document fell from Ethan's limp hands. Helen snatched it and read it in a panic. She read it once, twice, 3 times. The truth hit her with such force that she staggered back and collapsed onto the sofa. Her face, once red with anger, was now as pale as a corpse's. The entire narrative of her life collapsed in an instant. She was not the grand lady of her son's house. She was simply a tenant, a parasite, living off the generosity of the daughter-in-law she had so despised. "This house is mine," Eleanor repeated, her voice echoing clear and authoritative in the suffocating silence. "The cars in the garage are company assets. I paid for this furniture. Even that plate you used for dinner last night, Mom. It's my money." She paused, letting the cruel truth sink into their bones. "So, Mom, I repeat the question. If someone has to leave here, who would it be?" 2 days passed in an atmosphere of suffocating Cold War. Helen locked herself in her room, too ashamed to show her face. Ethan wandered the house like a caged lion, confused, furious, and desperate. All his attempts to contact Eleanor by phone failed. His wife seemed to have disappeared from the house, but her presence was felt in every corner through the cut-off utilities and the torturous silence. On the 3rd day, a message arrived on Ethan's phone from Eleanor. It was short and emotionless. "Tomorrow at 10 a.m. at this address. To end everything. Come alone." Below the message was an address in the heart of New York's financial district. A towering skyscraper Ethan had often passed but never entered. A spark of hope flickered in his mind. Maybe Eleanor wanted to negotiate. Maybe he could still get his share or at least access to an emergency fund. With that thought, he decided to go. The next morning, with the last of the cash in his wallet, he took a taxi to the address. When he arrived in front of the building called Apex Tower, he was astonished. It wasn't a small office. It was the headquarters of a major corporation. Hesitantly, he entered the incredibly grand lobby. The floor was polished black granite, like a mirror. Seeing him approach, the receptionist immediately stood up and smiled kindly. "Good morning, sir. How may I help you?" "I have an appointment with Ms. Eleanor Vance," Ethan replied, a little nervously. The receptionist smiled even wider. "Ah, Mr. Cole, of course. The president is expecting you. I'll escort you." "President? CEO?" Ethan's heart pounded. He followed the receptionist to a private VIP elevator to the top floor, the 50th. When the elevator doors opened, a professional-looking young woman greeted him. "Good morning, Mr. Cole. I am Ms. Davies, President Vance's personal assistant. This way, please. The president is waiting for you in her office." Ethan walked down a silent, thickly carpeted hallway. Every employee he passed stopped and nodded respectfully. "Good morning." They all seemed to know him. Ms. Davies opened a huge, solid wood door at the end of the hall. Behind it was an office larger than the entire ground floor of his house. The walls were glass, offering a 360-degree view of New York City. In the middle of the room, behind a massive mahogany desk, sat a woman. It was Eleanor, and yet it wasn't. She wore a perfectly tailored dark blue pantsuit. Her hair was impeccably styled, and her aura radiated absolute power and confidence. This was not the Eleanor who cooked short ribs in the kitchen. This was not the Eleanor who bowed her head when insulted. This was a queen on her throne. "Welcome to Apex Dynamics, Ethan," Eleanor greeted. Her voice was calm but resonated in the room. Or, to be more precise, welcome to my world. Ethan could only stand there, his mouth slightly agape. The nameplate on the desk confirmed everything. Eleanor Vance, president and CEO. This company is yours? He stammered. Yes, it's mine. I founded it 8 years ago, starting in a small garage, Eleanor replied as if she were talking about the weather. She pressed a button on the intercom. Davies, please bring the financial report for Mr. Cole. A moment later, Ms. Davies entered and placed a folder in front of Ethan. Open it, Eleanor commanded. With trembling hands, Ethan opened it. Inside were the details of every monthly transfer he had received. They weren't investment returns, but a company expense item coded as allowance for executive family members. The next page contained a breakdown of all the expenses on his and his mother's credit cards, all paid in full by Apex Dynamics. Everything you've had, everything you've enjoyed, everything you've used to support your mistress, Eleanor continued, her voice devoid of emotion, was an allowance from me, a benefit I offered you for your status as my husband. She looked him directly in the eyes, now filled with terror. And like an underperforming employee, that benefit is now officially revoked. Ethan collapsed into the chair opposite her. His invisible crown had turned to dust. The foolish prince finally realized he was nothing, just a name on an allowance list that had now been deleted. Ethan's defeat at Apex Tower was psychological, but Eleanor knew that for people like Ethan and Helen, the biggest blow was the physical and public loss of their status symbols. 2 days after that meeting, the red European sports car Ethan often used to show off was parked in front of the house. Ethan was preparing to go out to do something very humiliating, borrow money from his friends. Just as he opened the door, 2 large tow trucks stopped right in front, blocking the exit. Several burly men in uniforms that read AD Logistics got out. Good morning? We're from the Asset Management Department of Apex Dynamics, said the team leader, polite but firm, showing an order. We've come to repossess the 2 vehicles with the license plate numbers listed on this document, which are company property. One was Ethan's sports car, the other, the luxury SUV Helen used for her social gatherings. What are you doing? This is my car, Ethan protested. According to our records, this vehicle is registered as a company car for executive use under the name of Apex Dynamics. It is not personal property, sir, the employee replied calmly, signaling his team to begin the operation. Inside the house, Helen heard the commotion and came out immediately. Her eyes widened as she saw her precious car being prepared for towing. Hey, what are you doing to my car? Don't you know who I am? She screamed hysterically. Neighbors began to come out of their houses to watch the drama unfolding in front of the magnificent mansion. The spectacle was a nightmare for Helen, who had always guarded her image as a high society lady. We're just following the instructions of the legal owner, ma'am, the employee replied, unfazed by Helen's fury. Ethan and Helen could do nothing but watch, stunned, as the 2 luxury cars, their symbols of pride, were loaded up and taken away. They were now stranded in their palace without their golden chariots. The humiliation, in front of the dozens of prying eyes of their neighbors, was more painful than the loss of the money itself. Eleanor had not only taken away their luxury, but also their pride and the social mask they had worn for so long. For Ethan, losing the car was a huge blow, but the deadliest blow came from an unexpected place. Chloe. Chloe's birthday was in 2 days, and Ethan found himself in the worst situation of his life. No money, no car, no power. Desperate, he sold the 1 luxury watch he still had, a gift Eleanor had given him on a past anniversary. With that money, he bought a handbag from a decent domestic brand, but it was a far cry from the Maison Elise standard Chloe demanded. He showed up at Chloe's apartment with the gift box and a bouquet of flowers. Chloe's face, initially smiling, soured as soon as she saw the contents of the box. What is this? She asked in a cold tone. It's a gift for you. Happy birthday, honey, Ethan replied nervously. Chloe scoffed. A gift? You call this a gift? My grocery tote is more expensive than this. Chloe, please understand, I'm going through a tough time. I don't care about your problems, Chloe cut him off, her anger exploding. She threw the handbag box at Ethan. I'm sick of your excuses. You're a loser. A foolish prince with nothing. Did you think I was going to stick with you now that you've become a beggar? You're nothing but a parasite living off your wife, Ethan. And now that your wife has cut you off, you're nothing. Every word from Chloe was a dagger stabbing directly into the heart of Ethan's already shattered ego. I've already found a replacement, Chloe continued with a cruel smile. A real man, not a mama's boy like you. Just then, the horn of a luxury car honked from below. Chloe grabbed her purse, an authentic Maison Elise bag. Where did you get that bag? Ethan asked in a hoarse voice. From Mr. Evans. He's taking me to Paris next week to celebrate my birthday, Chloe replied nonchalantly. She walked past Ethan, deliberately bumping his shoulder, and opened the door. Oh, and one more thing. The rent on this apartment is due tomorrow. Congratulations on being homeless. Chloe slammed the door in Ethan's face. Through the window, Ethan saw Chloe go downstairs and get into a Bentley driven by an older, wealthy man. They drove off laughing, leaving Ethan alone in the silent apartment hallway, shattered and completely alone for the first time in his life. After being abandoned by Chloe, Ethan stumbled home. He found his mother sitting in the dark living room. The electricity had been cut off. They hadn't paid the bill, or rather, they couldn't pay it. Only a faint emergency light shone, revealing the dust beginning to gather on the expensive furniture. They sat in miserable silence, two nobles cast out from their throne. Suddenly, the front door opened. Eleanor walked in. Her silhouette was sharply defined against the light from outside. She didn't light any candles or lamps. She just stood in the doorway looking at the two figures huddled in the darkness. I've come to make you one last offer, Eleanor said, her voice cold and formal. Ethan and Helen lifted their heads. You have two options, Eleanor continued. First, you can leave here tonight. You can take your clothes, but leave everything else. I won't press charges against you for anything, and you'll be free to go wherever you want. To leave without money, without a destination, without a place to live. That option was equivalent to being on the street. The second option, Eleanor held out her hand. In her palm was a simple key. I've rented a small apartment for you. 3 months' rent is already paid. Inside, there's basic furniture and some cash on the table so you can eat for a week. After that, you'll have to find a way to survive on your own. Helen looked at the key with horrified eyes. A small rental apartment after decades of luxurious living. It was an unimaginable humiliation. But Ethan saw it from a different perspective. After being humiliated by Chloe and left without a penny, Eleanor's offer felt like a lifeline in the middle of the ocean. It was a humiliation, yes, but it was also a chance to survive. With a heavy hand, walking past his mother, who was still paralyzed by shock, Ethan walked toward Eleanor. He didn't dare to look his wife in the eye. He just bowed his head and took the small key from Eleanor's palm. It felt heavier than a gold bar. It was the key to his new, miserable life, and the symbol of his absolute surrender. That night, with only 2 suitcases of clothes, Ethan and Helen left their palace in a taxi. They arrived at a narrow alley in the outskirts of the city. The rental apartment was exactly as they had imagined. Small, with the paint on the walls starting to peel and a single light bulb shining dimly at the entrance. When Ethan opened the door, a smell of dampness and confinement greeted them. This was their bitter reality. From the golden throne, they had fallen into the deepest abyss. Life in the cramped rental apartment was hell on earth for Helen. Her pride was eroded every day by the heat from the tin roof, the noise of neighbors through the thin walls, and the bitter reality of having to think twice before even eating. The money Eleanor had left them ran out in the blink of an eye. Now they lived on Ethan's small, irregular salary. Arrogance was no longer a luxury she could afford. The final blow to her pride came when, in desperation, she tried to contact one of her high society friends who had always flattered her. With the last of her phone credit, she called and, in a pleading voice, tried to borrow money. The response was icy and humiliating. Helen, I'm sorry. My husband says we shouldn't associate with people of ill repute. Besides, we're going on vacation to Switzerland and we need a lot of money. The call was cut. At that moment, Helen broke down. She realized that the social status she had so revered was as thin as paper. Without the money and luxury to back her up, she was nothing in their eyes, just a shameful piece of gossip. Gathering what strength and pride she had left, she did something she had never imagined in her life. She took a hot, crowded city bus and went to Apex Tower. She looked so small and lost in the grand lobby. Her once expensive clothes now looked cheap and worn. Eleanor's assistant, Ms. Davies, saw her in the lobby with a look of compassion. She escorted her not to the CEO's office, but to a small, modest meeting room. A few minutes later, Eleanor entered. She wasn't wearing a power suit, but a simple blouse and pants. Her face was serene. There was no expression of triumph. Helen couldn't hold it in any longer. She fell to her knees on the floor and burst into tears. Her sobs were no longer the manipulative tears of a drama queen. They were the heartbroken sobs of an old woman who had lost everything. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I'm sorry," she sobbed between tears. "I was wrong. I was arrogant. I was cruel to you. I was jealous of you. I was jealous seeing how incredible you were, while my son can't do anything. So I blamed you for everything." She confessed it all. Her envy of Eleanor's success, which she had secretly known about. Her arrogance used to hide the shame of her son being a kept man. And even her fatal mistake of supporting Ethan's affair to have a daughter-in-law she could control. "Please, I'm begging you, Eleanor. I'm not asking you to give me back the luxury. I just can't live like this. Punish me, but please don't be so hard on Ethan. Everything he did is because of my bad upbringing." Eleanor listened to the entire confession in silence. She didn't help her up. She let her mother-in-law pour out all the poison of regret from her heart. When the sobs subsided, Eleanor finally spoke. Her voice was soft but firm. "Get up, Mom. Being on the floor doesn't change anything. Regret means nothing without change. This punishment isn't to torture, but to teach. What lesson have you learned now?" Helen looked up at her with tear-filled eyes. For the first time, she saw Eleanor not as a daughter-in-law or a money machine, but as a woman far wiser and stronger than herself. While his mother swallowed the bitter medicine of repentance, Ethan was swallowing dust and sweat in the warehouse of a large logistics company on the outskirts of the city. After being rejected from dozens of office jobs for having no work experience, the only job he could get was as a warehouse worker. The first day was hell. His body, used to the softness of the sofa and the coolness of air conditioning, had to lift heavy boxes under the heat of the warehouse roof. His muscles screamed in pain. His soft palms were scraped and blistered within the first hour. His foreman was a rough man who cursed at him if he worked too slowly. He had lunch with the other workers, sitting on a piece of cardboard, eating from a lunchbox with modest sides. He heard them complain about motorcycle payments and their children's tutoring fees, real problems that sounded so foreign to his ears. Here, no one cared about his last name or what car he used to drive. Here, his worth was measured solely by how many boxes he could move. Every night, he returned to the rental apartment with his body in pieces. He would fall asleep as soon as he arrived, with no time to think too much. Slowly but surely, the hard work began to change him. His arrogance and laziness were eroded by extreme exhaustion. On the first weekend, he received his salary, a few old bills in a brown envelope. The amount wasn't even enough to buy a round of drinks at the cafe he used to frequent with Chloe. But as he looked at that money, a strange feeling arose in his heart, a feeling he had never experienced before. It was pride. This money was his. It wasn't a gift, not an allowance, not the result of living on loan. It was the result of his own sweat. That night, for the first time, he gave his entire salary to his mother. "Mom, here's the money for this week's groceries," he said briefly and went to his room to rest his aching body. Helen looked at the money in her hands, then at her son's back, now firmer and more robust. Tears welled up in her eyes again. Her son, her foolish prince, was finally starting to learn how to be a man. A month after the tearful meeting with Helen, Eleanor decided it was time to close the final chapter of her past. She didn't meet Ethan in an office or at her home. She went to the small cafeteria where the warehouse workers had lunch. Ethan was sitting alone in a corner, eating greedily. His appearance had changed a lot. His skin was darker, his body more muscular, and his gaze was no longer empty but filled with a worker's concentration. He wasn't surprised to see Eleanor arrive and sit across from him. Eleanor, in contrast to the surroundings, wore casual but elegant clothes, but there was no longer a cold, intimidating aura about her. Her face looked calmer, more at peace. "How are you, Ethan?" Eleanor greeted, her voice sincere. "Fine. I'm fine," Ethan replied briefly and awkwardly. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor got straight to the point. She placed a thick folder on the table between their plates. "These are the papers, Ethan. Read them, and if you agree, sign them." Ethan already knew what they were: the divorce papers. He opened them and read them quickly. Eleanor wasn't demanding anything. The division of assets only stipulated that all assets in Eleanor's name would remain her property, and Ethan would not receive a single cent, a fact he had already accepted. There were no burdensome or humiliating clauses. Everything was clean and professional. "I'm not going to make things difficult," Ethan said in a hoarse voice without looking up from the papers. "I'll sign." "Thank you," Eleanor replied. There was a moment of silence. The bustle of the cafeteria filled the void between them. "Eleanor," Ethan called her name, finally daring to look into the eyes of the woman who was once his wife. "I'm sorry for everything. I know it's too late, and I don't expect your forgiveness. I just want you to know. I truly regret it." Eleanor looked at him. And for the first time in a long time, she saw the real Ethan. Not the foolish prince, not the cheating husband, but simply a man who had made many mistakes and was now facing the consequences. "I've forgiven you, Ethan," Eleanor said softly. "And I've also forgiven myself for abandoning myself for so long. Now we can both start a new life." Ethan signed the papers with a pen Eleanor lent him. When he handed the folder back to her, he felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. It was a sad ending, but also a relief. Their marriage, filled with hypocrisy, officially ended in a modest cafeteria, over a table holding a plate of food and the droplets of sweat from hard labor. Months passed, and the lives of Ethan and Helen found a new, arduous rhythm. After the 3-month lease that Eleanor had funded ended, they had to pay the rent themselves. They had to move to an even smaller, more remote apartment. Helen, with no professional skills, began taking orders for homemade cookies from her neighbors. Her baking ability, once used only to show off at her social gatherings, was now her only means of survival. Every morning, she learned to haggle for vegetable prices at the local market and to meticulously count every penny. She no longer complained. Her aged face was marked by fatigue, but also by a newfound strength. Ethan continued to work at the warehouse. The pay was low, but he was a diligent worker. He no longer dreamed of sports cars or luxury watches. His dreams were now much more modest: to pay the rent on time and make sure his mother had money to buy ingredients for her cookies. The mother-son relationship changed completely. Before, they were partners in laziness and arrogance. Now, they were a team fighting to survive. Sometimes, when Ethan came home from work and found his mother asleep from exhaustion in front of the oven, he would cover her with a blanket, a small gesture of care that would never have occurred to him before. They had lost everything: fortune, status, friends, and family. It was a very expensive life lesson. They weren't happy, but they were no longer living a lie. In poverty and hard work, they were slowly reclaiming the fragments of dignity they had lost. Eleanor didn't give them a fish, nor did she even give them a fishing rod. She simply threw them into the sea and forced them to learn how to swim. And surprisingly, they managed. A year later, Eleanor stood before the enormous window of her new office in Singapore. Apex Dynamics had achieved massive expansion in the Southeast Asian market. The contract she had just signed was worth billions of dollars. She gave a faint smile. Not a cold, calculating smile like before, but a smile tinged with genuine satisfaction and peace. After the divorce, she would occasionally hear about Ethan and Helen through Ms. Davies, who monitored them from a distance on her instructions. Knowing they could survive on their own, Eleanor was finally able to let go of the past completely. She no longer lived in the shadow of revenge. Her energy was now fully dedicated to building her empire and, more importantly, to building her own happiness. She began to spend more time on herself. She learned to paint, traveled alone, made new, sincere friends. Her phone rang. It was a video call from her friend Sarah. "Congratulations, President. Incredible. I saw the news about the contract on TV," Sarah exclaimed from the other side of the screen. Eleanor laughed. "Thanks, Sarah. It's all thanks to your support." "So, when are you coming back? We have to celebrate soon." "Soon," Eleanor replied, her eyes gazing at the bright city skyline below her. After the call, Eleanor stood there looking at the endless city lights. Before, she felt her fortune was a gilded cage she had built to lock herself in a farce. She had willingly become a small, invisible bird to protect someone else's ego. Now she realized that cage had never existed. The door was always open. She was just too afraid to fly. That betrayal, that pain, was the storm that broke her cage, and her revenge was how she learned to use her wings. Now she no longer needed a cage. She no longer needed to dim her light for anyone. She was Eleanor Vance, not someone's wife, not someone's daughter-in-law. She was the queen of her own destiny.